Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Hugo Chavez is gone, but the Chavista government of Nicolas Maduro continues to go at it with the media over the Venezuela story. First, it was Glenn Greenwald's partner. Now it's Edward Snowden's lawyer, held and interrogated flying into Britain. Amazon's Jeff Bezos owns The Washington Post, but is also in business with the CIA. Does that put the paper in a conflict of interest? And high-end photography. A couple of Russians snapping away above the clouds over Shanghai. That's our web video of the week. Ever since anti-government protesters hit the streets in Venezuela 10 days ago, we've been tracking the media coverage of that story. What began as demonstrations over inflation, shortages, and a lack of jobs is now being characterized by President Nicolas Maduro and the media that back him as an attempted coup d'etat. Media outside the country tend to see this story differently. A 24-hour news channel beaming in from neighboring Colombia has had its path into Venezuela blocked on the orders of the president. Then Maduro threatened to kick CNN Español out of the country over its coverage. For all of the issues that Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, had with the news media, this is the first time Venezuela has effectively reined in coverage from outside its borders. Both the government and the opposition have taken to Twitter to wage their media battle, but many of the images spread, mostly on the opposition side, have been exposed as fakes, either old or from another country altogether. His opponents accuse President Maduro of muzzling the media, but this isn't the first time Venezuela's democratically elected government has accused opposition news outlets of having an agenda that goes far beyond mere journalism. Our starting point this week is Caracas. On day one of the protests, Venezuelans looking for live, comprehensive coverage tuned into NTN 24. The channel is Colombian. VTV, Venezuela's state-run channel, had Nicolas Maduro looking presidential, working a crowd of supporters.
Some people died, and a lot of people were injured in Caracas and in other cities, but coverage was timid and slow. There were no explanations for this. I know that journalists and news channels have to verify information in real time before reporting, but that cannot keep us from doing our jobs. Journalism is about keeping people informed.
The only channel, foreign cable channel, that was broadcasting live this protest was taken off the air. So, really this is a problem because it affected the right of Venezuelans, all Venezuelans, to be informed, to access to important information. And I think it obviously affected the climate, the environment in which journalists and the media are doing the work.
Here is the government's response from a parliamentarian who deals with media issues in Venezuela.
The press in the country hasn't been objective or impartial. They have become opposition spokesmen. The international community should know that Venezuela is experiencing a soft coup, undoubtedly supported by the US. Also, the national and international media are manipulating information, saying that the government is lashing out on the demonstrators.
Those are the kinds of arguments many governments make when they clamp down on their media. Accusations of an ideological bias, conspiracy theories, and vague talk of manipulation from the outside. However, supporters of the Maduro government also argue that it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you.
It is very different to defend freedom of the press when you have responsible, politically neutral media outlets, and it is certainly not the case in Venezuela. Most of the privately owned media outlets are profoundly anti-government. There is also a clear precedent.
That precedent came in 2002. The democratically elected Hugo Chavez had been in office for 3 years, having inherited a media landscape controlled mostly by his right-wing opponents. Some news outlets, including TV channels RCTV and Venevisión, openly backed a coup against Chavez that led to the president's temporary overthrow. The coup leaders then went on those channels, thanked them, and said the coup could not have succeeded without them. It took Hugo Chavez 3 days to regain power, but Chavistas would never forget what happened, and the government then went to work redrawing the Venezuelan media landscape.
This has been years in the making. When the events of April of 2002 happened, the government of President Chavez at that time realized that the state media apparatus was very weak to challenge the influence of private media. And since then, they have built a prosperous state-owned media that basically censors any opinion or point of view that contradicts the government and basically broadcasts propaganda. And there were, till last year, only one critical broadcaster remaining in the air, Globovisión.
Now even Globovisión has changed sides. After years of clashes with the Chavez government and crippling fines for alleged violations of media laws, it was sold off last year to businessmen reportedly tied to the government. Cecilia Colmenares was an editor at Globovisión, but quit the day after the protests began over the blackout issue. She says she relied on the Colombian channel, NTN24, for the kind of coverage she could not get domestically. Then that channel went to black.
That happened on the 12th of February. I remember because I left my office, went home to watch NTN24, and all of a sudden, the signal was cut.
The president made that decision against NTN24 as it was encouraging violent protest. A government cannot allow that kind of behavior. So we are monitoring many international channels, such as CNN and Español.
CNN, las 24 horas del día, su programación es programación de guerra.
And some of the big print media around the world who are trying to influence public opinion.
The government claims that NTN24 were causing havoc. They were not. They were doing my job. As a journalist, I can tell you they were keeping people informed about what was going on. They were showing images that were not shown by any local channels.
So opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez's campaign has moved online. Activists have too, providing news images, not all of which proved to be real, and some even went mainstream.
Some of the images that were posted by media outlets were afterwards proven to have been taken from Greece or Egypt. Some were shown to have been doctored. The effect of these images is to mislead at best and or decontextualize a story.
The problem is that people have used social media to fill a void. They've noticed that local media are not doing their jobs. People want to be informed, and social networks provide them with an outlet. However, most of these people believe everything they read, which is not true. They're not journalists. They don't realize they need a source.
A decade ago, Hugo Chavez ran the government and the opposition had most of the media. Today, under Nicolas Maduro, the media playing field is still lopsided, but it's slanted in favor of the Chavistas. The Bolivarian revolution has transformed the country. The one thing that hasn't changed is when Venezuelans turn on their televisions. They still don't get the full story. They still don't really know what to believe. Our Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the story coming out of Venezuela.
Reliable information is very hard to find. People are inadequately informed in one of the most dangerous and uncertain times the country has ever faced. People are turning to social media and international news outlets to be informed. These problems have not received the attention they deserved on the media, and it's important that they do because they give meaning to these protests.
Censorship cases doubled in the past 12 years. There is less reliable information and more rumors, given that some people tend to share unverified information or pictures through social media. The economic situation has been almost entirely ignored since the protests began, and while protesters maintain media focus, we are becoming clueless about the central government's economic decisions and actions.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Remember the story of David Miranda? He's the partner of Glenn Greenwald. He was detained at Heathrow Airport in London because he was carrying hard drives containing some of the data leaked to Greenwald by Edward Snowden on the National Security Agency's surveillance story. Now Snowden's lawyer says she's gone through the same kind of thing. Jesselyn Radak of the Washington-based NGO, the Government Accountability Project, says that last week she was detained and questioned at Heathrow in a way that she described as intrusive and hostile. and that she was questioned about her trips to Moscow to meet with Snowden. Raidak was on her way to the Ecuadorian embassy in London to meet with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange when she said she was detained. She later said, "I feel like lawyers and journalists are now beginning to be targeted at the borders of countries in the Western Hemisphere and so-called democratic countries." The David Miranda incident at Heathrow took place 6 months ago. He says he was held for 9 hours. This past week, Britain's High Court ruled Miranda's detention was in fact lawful, deemed to be justifiable in the interests of national security. Last week, we looked at the intensifying media story that's coming out of Turkey. Since then, journalists have hit the streets to say enough is enough. On February 16th, around 200 journalists came out to protest against what they call censorship and government pressure. Marching on the offices of the governor of Istanbul, they called for the easing of restrictions and an end to government interference. One participant, Cidem Anad, said censorship is squeezing journalists. Pressure and self-censorship are burning the media. The Prime Minister is interfering with live reports and even subtitles. She was referring to an incident from coverage of last year's Taksim protests when Tayyip Erdogan called Haberturk TV, demanded that the channel change a headline, and the editors there complied. Audio files recently leaked online revealed a newspaper editor colluding with allies of the Erdogan government and altering news coverage in the government's favor. There was the recent deportation of Mahir Zeynalov, an Azerbaijani journalist, supposedly over an expired visa. He had criticized the government on Twitter. And then there's also the highly contentious Internet Bill, recently passed by Parliament, which critics argue is the government's way to control the flow of information online in what is an election year in Turkey. Gunmen in Libya have attacked a television station twice in 1 week. It's part of a trend of targeting the media there. At midnight on February 12th, the Tripoli headquarters of Al Asama TV was stormed. The gunmen forced journalists out before firing rocket-propelled grenades into the building. A week later, shots were fired at the same office. No one is reported to have been injured. Al Asama is a private network that commentators say is a target because of its critical stance on the General National Congress, the country's main political authority, and for opposing the influence of Islam in Libyan politics. Al Asama's Ashraf Al-Azabi said, "These people must have a message they want to deliver, but this is not our way, and we will continue in the same way and deliver our message and the people's message." It's a similar story in Benghazi, where Libya Al-Arar TV, a channel also known to be critical of religious groups in politics, was recently attacked. Elsewhere in Libya, earlier this month, 4 journalists were kidnapped. 3 of them worked for the state-owned network Al-Wataniya TV, the other for the state-owned newspaper Tarablus. Washington, D.C. is a city of conflict, special interests, and for the journalists working there, potential conflicts of interest. 6 months ago, Jeff Bezos, the tech baron from Amazon.com, bought the Washington Post for $250 million. 2 months later, Amazon, a company that's all about data, won a $600 million contract with the Central Intelligence Agency for cloud computing services. That has set off some alarm bells. A group called RootsAction.org is asking, how can the Post write a piece on the CIA without first disclosing to its readers that its owner's other company, Amazon, is being paid to safeguard the agency's data? All this is going down in the wake of the Edward Snowden NSA story on surveillance in America. And what of the Post, the only newspaper ever to take down an American president? Like many papers, it was losing money, between $50 and $100 million a year. But is a potential conflict of interest a price that a money-losing publication simply has to pay after it gets bailed out by a tech billionaire? The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on the Post, the Amazon CIA deal, and the possible implications for the paper's journalism.
A basic principle of journalism is to acknowledge when the owner of a media outlet has a major financial relationship with the subject of coverage. So begins the petition presented to the Washington Post last month, requesting the paper be open with its readers about the fact that its new owner, Jeff Bezos, has recently secured a $500 million deal for data processing and security between his old company, Amazon, and the CIA.
So on the one hand, Amazon is paid all this money by the CIA to keep its secrets as a clandestine agency. On the other hand, the Washington Post is reporting on all sorts of aspects of the CIA.
So the big issue now, of course, is surveillance, and what the NSA is doing, what the FBI is doing, what the CIA is doing. legally or illegally. And so if you have the owner of the Post bragging about looking forward to a very successful relationship with the CIA through Amazon.
Does that present any conflict for you, the fact that you provide the cloud that the CIA uses for its data?
I don't think so.
Give me a break. Of course there's a conflict.
Journalism requires, if it's going to be authentic, that people know what they're getting. And the best way to deal with that is to be candid with the readers whenever there's substantial coverage of the CIA. That's not happening.
The petition, signed by more than 33,000 Americans, was taken in person by Norman Solomon to the Post's executive editor, Martin Barron, requesting full disclosure about a potential conflict of interest whenever the Post reports on the CIA. The paper refused. The Listening Post requested an interview with Barron, who declined but sent us an email saying, "No journalists here have any links to the CIA. As is evident from our journalism, we've reported aggressively on the CIA and other agencies, much to their consternation."
The Post has certainly been reporting on NSA abuses. That really isn't the point. It's really the disclosure, shining the spotlight on it. Let people decide for themselves if the Post reporting is good and accurate and not pulling any punches. Would I say that you shouldn't trust anything that the Post writes about it? Absolutely not. But you should have that information of this built-in conflict when you do read one of their stories.
We put that to Dana Priest, the Post's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, much of whose work over the past 28 years has focused on intelligence and counterterrorism.
It's correct that they say that we need to talk about our conflicts of interest. We don't need to do it in every story. We've done it before. Jeff Bezos owns the Post now, but it's really Amazon that has the relationship. We are going to be very mindful of the public perception. If anyone at the Washington Post, any editor, any owner, any publisher ever said to me, "Don't write about that because we have corporate interests," I would be out of there in a second.
The relationship between mainstream media outlets and the CIA is neither unique to the Post nor new. Back in 1977, Carl Bernstein, one half of the reporting team that catapulted the Post into the global spotlight with Watergate, produced an extensive report for Rolling Stone magazine, exposing previously classified relationships dating back to the 1950s between the CIA and some of the most influential media outlets in America, including the New York Times, CBS News, and Time magazine.
According to Bernstein, more than 400 journalists secretly carried out assignments for the CIA during the Cold War. Bernstein wrote, "Reporters shared their notebooks, editors shared their staffs, including the New York Times, which, over a 15-year period, sent a dozen or so undercover reporters around the world to provide assistance to the agency."
Back in 1967, the Washington Post itself disclosed that the CIA had paid $1 million over 5 years to the Newspaper Guild, the union of reporters, editors, and others. And then in the 1970s, there was the Carl Bernstein piece. 1980, the Harrison Salisbury, top reporter at the New York Times, wrote a book that had 3 chapters on the Times and the CIA connections. So things don't change over time.
I hate to, beat on Jill Abramson, but she is now the executive editor of the New York Times. And where was she in the early 2000s? Well, she was bureau chief in Washington, where Judy Miller was working for her, tell us all manner of lies, weapons of mass destruction, mushroom clouds, everything else. She got promoted for that? So if these people keep bubbling to the top, and then you have conflicts of interest par excellence on the part of people like Bezos, well, hello, there's not much hope that the press, the mainstream press, is going to give us the right time of day.
And given the mainstream media's track record over the past decade, many Americans are understandably dubious when it comes to reporting on intelligence matters. A law was passed in 1996, prohibiting the use of journalists as agents or assets by intelligence agencies. But Congress then could never have foreseen a world in which a tech baron would buy an American media institution with a CIA contract hanging over them like a cloud, triggering questions over conflict of interest and demands for disclosure.
I have to be frank, when I read the petition, I thought, well, have you been reading the Washington Post? We have been second to nobody in the world reporting on critical stories having to do with the CIA. Just last month, I wrote a very large story called CIA Covert Action in Colombia. Just recently, the Post again has been out in front on writing about the National Security Agency, the documents that Edward Snowden has released, and we've continued to be very aggressive in that, despite the critical nature of the politics around that.
The revelations from Edward Snowden about the NSA have really shown how deep and wide the surveillance activities go. And so frankly, our petition urging full disclosure from the Washington Post about their CIA, Bezos, Amazon ties, this just begins to pull on the thread. You know, if it's a few pixels on a screen, if it's a little bit of ink in the printed article, then people know a little bit more about the conflict of interest that exists.
4 decades ago, the Washington Post made journalistic history by taking down a president. Today, it's just another newspaper struggling to survive the changing economic landscape. Which begs the question, can the Post, or any paper, really afford to look a gift horse like Jeff Bezos in the mouth?
More Global Village voices now on the Washington Post and its owner's relationship with the CIA.
There is particular resonance for Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos doing business with the CIA through Amazon. The Post, of course, has done a lot of terrific reporting on national security issues. I'm not really sure what the Post can do other than disclose whenever it's appropriate, and executive editor Martin Barron has said he will do exactly that. I have no reason not to take him at his word, and I really think that's about the best that the Post can do.
It's my view that the Washington Post management and Jeff Bezos need to have a conversation about his business contacts and make proper decisions about which of those require disclosure in the context of Mr. Bezos as owner of the newspaper. Beggars can be choosers at some appropriate level, although I believe that people involved in politics or religion or social affairs of any kind are absolutely entitled to be owners of publications. The proof is in their performance.
Finally, here are some of the key attributes of the filmmakers behind this next video. They're creative, tenacious, they have a healthy disregard for the rules, and clearly no fear of heights. Russian photographers Vadim Makarov and Vitaly Raskolov have made a name for themselves with their Daredevil camera work. Not only have they just scaled all 650 meters of the Shanghai Tower, China's tallest building and the second tallest in the world, they did it without any harnesses or safety straps. They were able to photograph, film, and blog about the entire process. While the ascent may have left the owners of the building a little red-faced over the lack of security around their skyscraper, the duo's video has got more than 23 million hits online, and some of the pictures are amazing. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post.
Что, снимает? Снимает. Мама в шоке будет.